Final Stop Brazil, Chapter 40. Return to Germany, Argentina, Peru, Tenerife. Welcome to Dunkeldeutschland. Kathy would pick me up with the children, so it was agreed. When I told her, I gave up and returned, tired to argue with her. But the true reason why I did so, neither she nor Michael would ever get to know from me. The greeting at the Hamburg airport was rather restrained. Michael wavered between joy and bad conscience. In Kathy's eyes, I believed to discover a triumphant lightning. "Watch it, it is very icy and slippery," Kathy warned me as we emerged from the airport building. I was overcome with pure horror when the icy winter cold of Germany greeted me. By no means was I prepared for this. Wearing a winter jacket I had bought in Fuengirola, but it was best warm enough for the mild winter in Spain. For this Siberian cold here, it wasn't warm enough, by far, for me, and I had neither a scarf nor gloves, not to mention hardly shoes or boots. So I slipped several times and tried to secure myself somewhere, while Kathy and Michael carried my suitcases and cartons in the BMW. We passed through the lighted streets of Hamburg. However, for me it was somber, everything inside me crammed together. It was an indescribable, terrible feeling, far worse than ever. How much I hated this country. At least in Kathy's apartment it was warm, where Marcus already waited impatiently for me and Max, and hugged me, happy to turn his attention immediately on Max. Darrell just looked at me intently. For him I was a stranger. Mark greeted me cordially, like nothing ever happened. Kathy had prepared lasagna, but I could barely bring down a mouthful. I felt like an animal locked in a tight cage. Kathy reported she was now working again, doing data entry at an insurance company. Michael then asked what would happen to the bar. "It will be sold." He couldn't know everything I had invested. I would not get back again. Could I blame him? One thing was certain. We needed to find our own place, and this as quickly as possible. No way for us to stay in this small apartment with Kathy, Mark, and the children. The very next day I started with a running around at offices and the struggle with the German bureaucracy. My first trip took me to the social welfare office, the place I had always vowed never to enter, but now I had no choice. After 2 hours of waiting, while shivering from the cold, I sat in front of a lady who asked me for documents I couldn't present. She was completely overcharged with my situation. "It can't be true that you have returned from Spain and have nothing. Where do you live now?" "With my daughter and her family of 4 in a 2-room apartment." "Does your daughter work?" "Yes." "Well, if you live with your daughter and your daughter is working, then she also has to pay for you. That is the law. Children are bound to support their parents as well as parents are bound to support their children." "But this is not only about me. What about my son? My daughter earns barely enough to feed her own family. I urgently need help. I don't even have clothes. The apartment of my daughter is much too small for all of us, and the situation unbearable." Is the social welfare not therefore helping people in need? I have worked all my life and never requested anything of the German government, but now I need help. I need money, an apartment, clothes, and some furniture, at least until I'm back to work. "Then you go first to the housing department." "I can't help you right now." "What do you mean? How should I go to the housing department if I don't even have money to pay for rent?" "You are giving me nothing for my son and me?" No. Desperation took hold of me. So I best jump into the elbow with my son or what? I screamed at the woman now, and was told, that is your problem. Angry and desperate, I slammed the door shut behind me. Weeping, I ran through the freezing ice-cold streets of Hamburg, Altona, towards the bus station. Collins, why have you only left me alone? It would have been better if the accident happened with both of us inside the car. I held inner dialogue again. To the housing department I needed not even to go, because, ironically, I was still tenant of the apartment at Holstenring, and this was my next way. The rest of the afternoon I spent with my Turkish subtenant in the building society to renew the lease contract with him for the home I would have needed now so badly, but agreement is agreement. Finally, he had paid me for accessing it, and that nothing was left was not his fault. Depressed, I went on my way back to Kathy's apartment. Half-hour waiting in the freezing cold for a bus, more than crowded. This was another nightmare for me, because I could hardly endure the proximity of other people. Despite cold temperatures, wet from sweating due to sheer panic or agoraphobia, I got off the bus. My whole body ached from cold and I felt sick. When Kathy came home from work, I told her about the failure at the welfare office. She was appalled. I have to pay for you. For a moment I was overcome by the thought, should they make her bleed and pay for me? After all, it was her fault I was sitting here now. If she wouldn't have kept Michael in Germany, I would never have returned under any circumstances. Uncertain, she asked, and what will you do now? I shrugged my shoulders. What should I do? I couldn't even look for work, because the job interview in a pretty summer dress would certainly be inappropriate at the moment. Why don't you at least go to the job agency you had worked for earlier? Or to mine, suggested Kathy. She was nervous. Now Mark interfered in the conversation. Rita cannot just show up with a pair of jeans. In the current work situation, you have to represent yourself at the employment agencies as well. And if luck she finds anything, she still waits 4 weeks until she has a first salary. Until Rita has money for clothing, housing, etc. It's gonna be summer. Resigned, I told them of the German I had met in Fuengirola, who promised me I could take over his apartment when he gave it up. The apartment only costs €200, but he doesn't know yet when he will move. Later in the evening, Chris called to hear how we were doing. Immediately, I was overcome with a howling misery. Not out of longing for Chris, but the longing for Spain. In tears, I told him now I fared. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. Come back. We find a possibility. Does Michael like the watch? He loves it and doesn't take it off anymore. Wait, can you talk to him yourself? I passed the phone to Michael so he could thank him for the expensive watch. Michael listened to what Chris was talking to him. Of course, Chris was trying to convince Michael to turn back with me to Spain. Finally, Michael gave me back the phone. Baby, I'm looking for a solution. I also know it is much too early yet, but please think about the possibility if the three of us, you, Michael, and I, start all over again. During the night, laying on the uncomfortable leather couch in Kathy's living room, I pondered over Chris' words. Yes, it was still too early. The pain over Colin's death was still as overwhelming like on the first day. There was no other man for me except Collins. He had shown me that it does exist, unconditional love, without limits. Again I cried and saw with my eyes closed Collins in front of me, how he broke the tense situation with his rival Chris, alone by his sovereign nature, or how he had driven these two men away on the last evening of his life. only with his self-confidence. This last night, when I felt him as intensely as never before inside me, kissing my body, I sobbed out loud when Michael suddenly stood in front of the sofa in the dark. "Are you crying, Mama?" Irritated, I replied, "Should I laugh about this shit situation? You gave up a paradise to live in this hell here. Why, Michael? Explain it to me." Abashed, he defended himself. "But I'm here much better in school and have my old friends back." Sadly, he slipped back into the bedroom, which he shared with Kathy, Marcus, Mark, and Darrell. In the morning, I felt very bad. My head was bursting with pain. My whole body ached. My chest hurt so much I could barely breathe, and the cigarette I lit, I put off after the first drag. My eyes I could hardly open, because they were totally inflamed and stuck together completely. My nose was clogged. I felt no hunger, but I drank the coffee Mark brought me. The hot drink was doing me good, because I was shaking with cold. Nevertheless, I forced myself up to call the man who had promised me the apartment. "I'm sorry, but my friend has taken over the apartment," I heard him say. "What a wonderful beginning of the day," I said bitterly to Mark. After I underwent a thorough cleaning of the tub, I prepared me a hot bath. In addition to the quality of the television program, the opportunity to take a hot bath at any time was about the only thing I liked about Germany. I stretched my aching body in hot water when Marcus and Darrell came bursting in. "May we go out with Max?" "All right, but have you washed and brushed your teeth yet?" Marcus looked at me as I had spoken foreign words to him. "So you didn't. This you do first, and then you can go out with Max." Marcus climbed up on the toilet seat to fish out of the mirror closet an old toothbrush with bristles turning in all directions. I could just shake my head in disbelief. Even Michael seemed to have forgotten all about personal hygiene, and brushed, under protest he would be late for school, hurriedly and superficially his teeth, before he gave me a volatile kiss and a "goodbye, Mama," storming out of the door. After the headache tablet made its effect, I also made preparations to go out when Mark said, "Why don't you rest? You look terrible. You can't go looking for work like this. One day or two won't make a difference." For me, it did very well make a difference, but everywhere I got rejections. "We are currently not contracting anyone," or "Sorry, although you have an excellent resume. In this economic situation, we are glad if we can keep a job to the third of our employees." Frustrated and depressed, I dragged myself to the Altona train station and remembered the words of my former boss: "If you return at some point, here is always an open door for you." At the same time, I saw the mocking eyes of my former colleagues. Absolutely no. This my pride would not allow. A terrible cough overcame me. My chest hurt so much I became dizzy. My nose was running from the cold, and I did feel sick like a dog. The rest of the day and the next 3 days I spent with a high fever on the sofa. I had slumped on a full-blown flu. The fever rose to about 40 degrees. I could hardly breathe and wanted only to die. Chris, who called every day now, seriously worried, said, "Rita, you're going down the drain there. Come back. I'm begging you, come back. At least to cure yourself here. It's warm again here." But how should I do this, in your opinion? I have no money to travel back and forth. "I'll call you back tomorrow. Don't worry about money. If necessary, I'll pay the ticket. But think about it. If you come, we both consider a solution for the 3 of us, okay?" Kathy suspiciously overheard the conversation on the phone. 1 week later, I sat alone on a plane on my way back to Spain. The situation in Kathy's apartment had become so tense I could stand it no more. In the morning, when Kathy prepared for work, everybody ran around her legs. Children, dog, Mark, and me. There was no quiet corner for nobody. A matrimonial life was impossible for Kathy and Mark due to the fact all children were sleeping in the bedroom, and in the living room, well, was I. Malicious. I thought many times, well, you should have considered this before. You didn't want it otherwise. Kathy responded miserable, irritated, and even jealous when Mark remained some evenings an hour or two in the living room to talk with me instead of following Kathy into the bedroom. Nevertheless, all reacted in horror as I packed my suitcase after Chris had given me a reservation number for the flight to Malaga over the phone and explained I only had to give this number on the check-in counter. They would then print out a boarding card, and the flight had already been paid. Until then, I wasn't feeling any better, except from the fever, which had sunk, and I explained to Kathy, Michael, and Mark I would cure myself in Spain, because I couldn't stand the weather here in Germany. Meanwhile, I had taken also a stubborn attitude towards Michael. He wanted to stay in Germany, please. I, in any case, with a little will again to live, didn't want to die from flu, which I only delayed there. And this time he should at least take over the responsibility for Max. It was finally his dog. I was surrounded by egoists. Now I would think, for a change, only about me. At Malaga airport, Chris awaited me, with a friend whom he introduced me as Ben, who brought us in his Audi to a location outside of Malaga, a place called El Palo. First, we stayed a while in his apartment, but I wasn't sure what to make of this Ben. Tended not to like him. For my taste, he talked too much and laughed too loud. So I was relieved when he took us in the evening into the center of El Palo, a typical little Spanish town where hardly a tourist would find his way to. In a backyard settlement, we entered a house where Blessed John, another new friend of Chris, lived, and where we would stay for the coming days. I liked Blessed right away with his peaceful and congenial way. He greeted me warmly, but for great conversations I was not in the mood. Didn't feel too well anyway. So Blessed showed me the room where I would spend the night with Chris, who had followed us, and reassured me, "Don't worry, I won't touch you. You take a good sleep first. You look as if you need it." Actually, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I awoke, I saw Chris lying beside me, in his favorite position on the stomach. A familiar sight. A familiar relationship. Right now, Chris showed me true friendship, and I was more than grateful to him for it. Quietly, I got up, not to disturb him, and went across to the living room where Blessed already prepared breakfast. Smiling, he wished me good morning, asked me whether I was feeling better, gave me a headache tablet, and then put coffee, buns, and cold cuts in front of me. I poured myself a coffee, but Blessed warned me, "You have to eat something, so you get your strength back. You still look very ill." Obediently, I took one of the buns, as Blessed continued, "If you're feeling any better, I would like to make you an offer. Chris told me about your problems, and I would like to help you. You know I'm practically in the same business as Chris, import of fabrics, clothing, jewelry, etc. But my business is in Tenerife, not here. Most of the time I also live there. My suppliers are from Argentina and Peru. You fly there looking for samples, choose them from suppliers who will help you. You'll be able to see a little of the cities, and then you come to Tenerife, where I expect you. Chris will also come there, as we are negotiating a contribution. Chris' business in Marbella runs very bad, and he will repel it to enter with me. but you will have time to enjoy some days in Tenerife. Chris had also got up now and listened silently to the offer of Blessed, then added, "But this only if you are feeling better, and if you think you can make this long journey. Blessed will pay you well. Then you have at least money in the meantime, until the bar is sold and your business account liberated." The prospect to have a little money at disposal, and despite the terrible cough, attacks still shaking me and giving me much pain, this offer, in addition to view new places and learn new things, the chance to recover at the end in Tenerife, was after all too tempting. I could hardly say no. In no moment I had the idea this was a planned thing. 2 days later, I sat in a plane to Buenos Aires. Chris had anxious been taking care of me in a very sweet and touching way, and just the same way he said goodbye to me at the airport. Actually, it seemed he had undergone a big change. He no longer was the cool, unapproachable guy. Initially, I flew from Malaga to Madrid, a huge airport where I held a real marathon to find the terminal for international flights, and just made it when the connecting flight was called up. Completely out of breath, I managed at last moment and sat in a comfortable plane of the TAP Airlines. Initially, I thought about taking a pill, but I quickly was involved in conversation with my seat neighbor, an Argentinian lady living in Spain, on her way to visit her daughter in Buenos Aires. She told me many interesting things about Argentina and named me the places I should necessarily see in Buenos Aires. However, she warned me at the same time not to wear jewelry or an expensive watch on the road, neither to go out alone in the dark. Buenos Aires is a beautiful city, but very dangerous. Very motivating. After we reached the right flight altitude, I watched an interesting movie on the board cinema and had a very good meal served by an attractive Argentine juice pusher who smiled openly at me. The movie ended and I began to play with the video console, tried the music and all other functions of the console. Considering this as economy class, it was a very comfortable flight. Eventually I dozed off and only awoke again when we leveraged to land. The woman next to me explained the mountains we saw were the Chilean Andes. Why Chilean? Because we are landing in Santiago de Chile and continue the flight with another machine to Buenos Aires. What a round trip! This, no one believes me. I'm circling around in Santiago de Chile on the way to Argentina, I thought, almost amused. After a short stay we went on, of course, with a less comfortable machine. A few hours later we landed in Buenos Aires. I said goodbye to my flight companion, and after I was through passport control, receiving my suitcase, I left the airport to take a taxi to the hotel Blessed had given me the address of. On the way, I asked the driver to stop at the currency exchange to change my dollars into Argentinian pesos. The taxi driver warned me also to be careful and take off my gold chain. The hotel made a decent impression. The staff was cautious, and I was more than pleased about the clean, comfortable room with a full bath. After the pig barn in Cathy's house and the post-war bathroom in Blessed's apartment, he heated water in a large pot in the kitchen for a warm bath. I was grateful for this paradise here. The thought that I had to fly all the way to Argentina to take a civilized bath made me laugh out loud. My cough and chest pain were still there, but could it be that my inner wounds began to heal? It was doing me so good to leave everything behind me and not having to worry about anything. It was already dark, and I felt quite overwhelmed by the long flight, so I soon slipped into the soft, warm bed. Buenos Aires would still be there tomorrow. Again, I thought of Collins, right now, in this big bed, which reminded me of the huge bed of Collins. Once again, I was overcome with overwhelming desire for him and his body, his unique way to make me infinitely happy. Again, I saw him before me as he tenderly kissed me, held me in his arms, and caressed me. Call my name, baby. I caught myself as I called his name. Collins, 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 I love you. But I wasn't crying anymore. The morning began to give way to another feeling, a memory of a love that wasn't meant to be. In the morning, I ate a little breakfast and actually met a German couple who reported to me about their trip to Patagonia and raved over the beauty of this country. Interested, I listened and wished for myself also to simply just visit this country to know it better. In the elevator up to my room, I met a young man who asked me, interested, where I was coming from. Without thinking, I replied, from Spain. He laughed and said, me too. We were quickly involved in a conversation, and I asked if he knew a locutorio around here. He didn't only know, but also accompanied me to one from where I called Chris and Blessed. Take good care of yourself. Our business partners will still get in touch with you today and will specify where you have to go. We will call you then. Since the rate was very low, the operator used Skype, which I didn't know until then, and it wasn't even existent in Europe. Look, the so-called third world countries were running well ahead in some things of the oh-so-sly Europe. I also called Kathy, who was flabbergasted. Where are you? In Argentina, and in a few days I fly on to Peru. And when are you thinking about coming back? Oh, I don't know yet. When I return, I'm going to spend a few days vacation in Tenerife first. Are you crazy? And Michael? And Max? How is it you ask me now, and Michael? I thought he was in such good hands with you in Germany. Was it not so? And Max is Michael's dog, not mine. Where Michael is, belongs Max too. And now let me please talk to Michael. I was surprised myself about my consistent tone. Hi, Mom. How are you? I'm doing a bit better. I'm gone away, to earn money for us. Where are you? Is Chris with you? In Buenos Aires, Argentina. No, I'm alone here. Where? Mama, you are alone so far away? Are you going to bring me something? When are you coming back? Yes, I'll bring you something, but when I'll come back, I don't know yet. Mama, do you really still love me? Yes, Michael, I love you very much, but I simply can't stand it in Germany. Take good care of Max. Remember, it's your dog. Don't forget it. I'll call you back. Love you. Bye. I love you too, Mom. After this, my companion and I took off for a visit to Buenos Aires, but further than the center we didn't get, because it started to pour down with rain. Within minutes, we were soaked to the bone and ran back to the hotel. I had just changed clothes when my phone rang. It was Blessed's partner, who introduced himself by the name of Mario. He suggested I should come the next day to the wholesale trade. Mario seemed to be quite funny. He joked, "Don't go making the Argentine men crazy. It's better you leave the tango, okay?" My Spanish companion met with me in the hotel restaurant and recommended an excellent menu. In the pouring rain was nothing else to do, so we stayed right there and talked over a few drinks about this and that. I didn't learn much of him, except he was a Basque from northern Spain. Why he was staying here, I learned not, but I was never particularly curious. The later it became, and the more he drank, the more awakened his interest in the pretty young waitress, which I watched amused. Finally, he found the courage to talk to her, and she asked him to wait until she was going to finish. I said good night with the words, "I will not wait with you until then. I go to bed." A little tipsy from the rum colas I had, I fell into bed and into deep sleep. In the morning, when I was just about to take the lift down, I casually glanced over to the door of the Basque and saw it was wide open. Surprised, I checked to see if everything was okay with him. He lay like dead in the bed, and I got a fright. Entered the room and saw he was, or had been, bleeding. I nudged him without him stirring. However, felt his body was warm. Now I shook him stronger until he woke up. A little dazed and amazed, he looked at me, and I explained that I was worried. When he came to himself a little more, he told me what had happened the previous night, which convinced me that Buenos Aires indeed was a hot patch. In the night he had waited for the waitress opposite the hotel in a park, when he was suddenly threatened by a figure with a weapon, who took his wallet with documents and money, and finally crushed him with the weapon. After he came to himself, he went to the bar to give himself the rest and went back to his room, too drunk to close the door. "And now?" I asked in alarm. He shrugged his shoulders, holding his aching head. "No idea. All gone. Documents, money. I think I have a problem." "This I think so too," I agreed, laughing about his knowledge. "You need to see the doctor and have to go to the Spanish consulate," I advised him, to which he replied, "Without money?" Without hesitation, I went over to my room, took a $50 bill out of my pocket, and carried it to the Basque. "This should help you first to go to the consulate. The rest you can keep." With big eyes, he looked at me. "Muchas gracias." I waved him off. "Next time, just be more careful, okay?" My cell phone rang. It was Mario, who explained to me where I should go. "When you're back, you pack your things. You're still flying today to Lima." This meant I had to hurry. I quickly said goodbye to the Basque, who now spontaneously hugged me. The address where I got off the taxi was just a normal market. Confused, I called Mario, who confirmed to me, however, I was at the correct place. But he was prevented. I should pick a few nice things, which were all for reorder in 1,000 copies. Peacefully, I wasn't able to choose anything here at all. Just hoped I did everything right. I couldn't choose a lot anyway. In my suitcase wasn't enough space. I quickly picked a few dresses and blouses I found very unusual, and had the opinion these were not found in Spain. All the while I asked myself the first time why Chris or Blessed not actually flew themselves. When the machine was about to land in Lima, the lights of the big city still appeared in the darkness, quite interesting. What I actually knew of Peru? Just about nothing, except that here was originated the once mighty Inca tribe. Could be interesting. Interesting it became, actually, straight after the landing. In the middle of the runway was a gangway rolled up to the plane, which everybody descended. For me, an entirely new experience. After coming down, I initially lit a cigarette and marched with hand luggage in one hand and cigarette in the other hand across the runway. Several airport staff waved and waggled their arms. I turned round in order to reassure myself they meant someone behind me, but there was no one behind me. When I looked in front again, the troops came running towards me. That this wasn't the welcoming committee was clear to me. And now it was dawning. The cigarette. I was on a runway with a variety of aircraft I could all blow up. In panic, I threw the cigarette away. The men then shouted in chorus, "No, no!" So I picked it up again and didn't know any more what to do with it. Stupid fact. But since the men had already reached me, they took off the cigarette. I saw myself already being arrested as terrorist. But to my relief, the men smiled kindly and said in broken English, "No smoking here." What an arrival. I changed the currency inside the airport and listened to the Inca groups in their traditional clothing as they played their folk music with a pan flute. Outside, I took a taxi and let it take me to the hotel address given by Mario. The driver asked me whether I really wanted to go to this address. I confirmed. He just shrugged his shoulders. Upon arrival, I realized why the driver inquired again. A small old house on the edge of a favela. Next to the hotel was a dingy little cafe. Inside the hotel, it was fairly dark. The only illumination was a dim lamp that hardly gave anything. The two women at the reception, they seemed to me mother and daughter, were indeed friendly, but wanted my passport. "I'm sorry, I'm not giving my passport out of hand." After some discussion, I gave them my German ID card. If this disappeared, it didn't matter, but with my passport, I would not play around. My room was equally dark, the light not even enough to read. As far as I could judge in the shadows, at least it was clean. Nevertheless, I was pissed off. Not long until my phone rang. It was Mario, and I had to go at him. "Are you actually loopy to accommodate me in such a stable? You're not seriously believing that I will stay here. Tomorrow, I'll find me something else. I hope there is in Lima any better." Mario laughed about my tantrum, which only made me angrier, but he assured me he would get a different hotel for me. "And in a better location," I ordered. And now, it was dark but still early. To read wasn't possible, to sleep much less. A TV didn't exist, at least not inside the room. I cursed Mario, Blessed, and Chris at the same time. Bored, I went down the stairs and outside. Fresh air I couldn't call this here by best intentions. It stank bestially. I entered the small cafe and thought leaving again immediately, because it didn't smell much better. Neither did it give the impression as if it was recommendable to eat something here. Except me, the only person present was the operator. I actually dared to order a café con leche, which I regretted deeply right away as I watched with horror how he prepared it. He tilted masses of sugar in the deep, black, indefinable broth, and boiled milk that had the appearance as it stood for hours on the stove, with a thick layer of cooked milk skin. There was nothing more in the world I disliked more, and now I sat helplessly in front of the cup, which I didn't dare to touch, searching for a planting pot in which I could pour the crap inconspicuously. I didn't actually want to insult the man and finally ordered the Inca Cola, which was at least cold and drinkable, and left the cafe and the coffee I never touched. Here I wouldn't come back any more anyway. Back at the hotel, I found near the reception area a room which was more reminiscent to a church, with the wooden benches, one behind the other. But this was the TV room. I now shared with an old man and watched anything on TV until my butt hurt from the hard bench. In the morning, I received my ID card back, whatever they've done with it, and dared to step outside the door one more time. In the distance, I spotted a bus stop. I went to read the timetable, but I might as well could forget about it. A young woman from the favela joined me. I asked her if a bus was going from here to downtown Lima. It was exactly her score, and we waited together. She told me about herself and became interested in my person. I noticed we were already waiting about 40 minutes. Some small buses were stopping, but they were full to the rafters, and people were hanging outside like barnacles. Where should be here still room for boarding? On the roof, perhaps? Are normal buses passing here as well? And when? I asked, confused. The young woman laughed as she replied, other buses would pass, but it would take time. Since I never been the most patient person, I stopped spontaneously a taxi and told her, come on, we have the same way. That is far too expensive, she protested. Not for me, come on. However, here the next nasty surprise waited for me, namely, on this taxi functioned, except of the horn, as good as nothing. As indicator, the driver used his arm. Mirrors were broken and not even available on the passenger side. With a brake, the driver also seemed to have some problems. All that didn't stop him from driving like a God's soul, like everyone in this four-lane chaos. One could hardly call this traffic. Until then, I had already seen a lot, but this here was unbelievable. Everyone drove how they wanted. Apparently, only the faster had right of way. Rules didn't seem to exist. Instinctively, I remembered Rosie in Spain, who voluntarily had lain down on the back seat for not having to see anything. She would have died with fear here, but I was close too. Between the cars that were overtaking on the left and right, pedestrians hopped like rabbits back and forth, but the cars wouldn't slow down. They kept on accelerating. From the area, I saw next to nothing, neither heard what my companion said while I was about to rip off the handle on which I was hanging desperately. Sweating and with trembling knees, I got out in the center, which was quite modern. My companion described me how to reach the sights of Lima. At the government palace, I watched the traditional changing of the guard and the subsequent dance of the Indian women and men. It was worth seeing and made me like Lima a little. This changed quickly again when I entered the restaurant back in the center, appearing okay from outside, but the food I ordered was indefinable and uneatable. Annoyed, I paid without having touched the plate and went to McDonald's. The somber-looking, dark-eyed Indians didn't exactly brighten my mood. Mario called me and gave me instructions to return to the hotel. I should pack and pay. A driver would pick me up to bring me in another hotel. I was glad to leave this dark hotel in that somber area. The new hotel was much friendlier, and the area around it also. The driver handed me a further suitcase and explained Mario had bought this for me. It was full of patterns. I could have a look at in the room. In the company of the hotel boy who carried the suitcases, I went up with the elevator and walked into a cute room with satellite TV, radio, and minibar. With a Peruvian phone card I had bought in the city for my phone, I called Chris, who greeted me pleased. How are you? How do you like Lima? When I told him I almost blew up the airport of Lima, he was doubling with laughter. I can see already you are better. When are you coming back? I have no idea. I think Mario will get a ticket for me. I will clear this and call you on this number again. I decided to take dinner in the hotel restaurant and choose a filet mignon with batata fritas, salad, and ordered a pint of white wine. Well chosen! A congenial voice from the side spoke to me in Spanish. I looked up at a nice smiling young man. May I sit down here? I nodded. Why not? For me it was always interesting to meet new people. My name is Cesar. What is your name? Why was the wine well chosen? I asked, instead of answering his question. Chilean wine is the best. I come from Chile, and I'm here on holidays. I want to know this country better. I've been here before, at Titicaca Lake. This was the beginning of a long evening. I listened fascinated as Cesar told me about his travels, about Peru, and about the history of the Incas. It was the beginning of a good friendship. He learned my name, but at the same time that any attempt for approaching was in vain. Cesar worked for the TAP Chile as an engineer and flew practically for free wherever he wanted, which was his passion, as I learned of him. For the next day he was planning to travel with the coach to Arequipa. It's a long trip, but I think interesting. Then I'll go on to Cusco, Machu Picchu, and the Valle Sagrado to the Incas. Wouldn't you like to come? Then at least you see something of real Peru. I was so fascinated by his reports, I spontaneously decided to accompany him. Neither Mario nor Blessed or Chris were thrilled when I told them I would stay longer and spend about a week traveling through Peru. It irritated me when they absolutely tried to convince me to return immediately. No, I want to see a bit of Peru. Since they could hardly come out with the truth, I wasn't supposed to know. They let me finally go. I took a taxi to the bus station to buy a ticket for the trip to Arequipa. It almost knocked me off my feet, as the taxi driver spoke to me in German, because she suspected me being German as well. What in God's name is a German doing as taxi driver in Peru? Couldn't you find any nicer corners of the world? I asked. She laughed and vowed to love this country. Moreover, her father was Peruvian, and she lived with and took care of him. Again, I didn't see much of Lima when I was engrossed in a conversation with her. I bought the ticket while she was waiting for me. Back in the car, she warned me, "Don't go by bus in the evening to Arequipa. It's far too dangerous. The buses are often robbed in remote areas by armed bandits." I felt very different now. What I had myself admitted here again. We exchanged phone numbers, and she offered me to stay with her at the next visit to Lima. "Do you think we do the right thing going in the evening?" I asked Cesar, after our luggage was stowed and we sat in the more or less comfortable seats. "I've heard the buses are getting robbed in the evening. At daytime as well, but at night the risk of accidents is reduced because of less traffic. Don't worry, you have a protector on your side." Very reassuring was this not for me. "How long will we be traveling?" "No idea, maybe 8 or 10 hours. Horrified, I looked at Cesar. "Are you mad? To persuade me to a 10-hour bus ride?" It was neither 8 nor 10 hours, but 13 hours of pure horror and pure fascination. After we left Lima was no more street lighting. We drove in pure darkness through several small villages until we reached a completely empty pampa. For hours not a single light visible on the roadside. Only bushes, plants, and giant cacti, only lit by the moonlight. Every moment I expected bandits lurking behind the bushes. After 5 hours we stopped at a hut serving as a kiosk. I quickly ran to the bathroom, fearing the bus would take off without me and I would have to spend the rest of my life in this deserted pampa. But we had even enough time for a coffee and a cigarette, I now urgently needed. Cesar allowed himself a snack. Then we went on, high up into the Andes. The fear I had in the steep serpentines let me forget all about bandits. The bus driver performed true millimeter measurement to maneuver the bus past the deep gorges at the corners. Out of sheer panic, I sat almost on Cesar's lap, who protectively put his arm around me. When he pointed out the window, I could barely look, but forced myself to the glorious sight of the Pacific Ocean and its meter-high waves slapping against the deep mountain slopes. In moonlight, it was a charming scene that changed very soon, and we faced incredible, powerful, and high snow-capped mountains, which was an equally impressive sight. Unfortunately, these terrible serpentines never seemed to end. "Why don't you sleep a little?" Caesar suggested, but I was too frightened, only barked at him, "How can you only stay so calm?" Caesar laughed. Eventually, after endless hours of going uphill on the mountains, we then went downhill. This was definitely too much for me. I felt like on a roller coaster and was poorly like hell. My face I kept buried in Caesar's chest. In between I muttered, "If you think that I ever again get with you onto a bus, then you're totally wrong." Luckily I dozed a little and woke up in bright sunshine, and it wasn't much more to reach our purposed destination. Upon our arrival, however, my body hurt from the uncomfortable seat. I was dead tired, felt poorly, was in a bad mood, and finally glad to sit in a civilized taxi, taking us to the city center, where we occupied cozy rooms in a hotel. I showered, crawled into bed, and slept for the rest of the day, while Caesar made his first sightseeing trip around Arequipa alone. In the evening he invited me for dinner in a Peruvian pizzeria, where I had the best lasagna of my life, while Caesar reported about his trip. The following day, a bright sunny one, Caesar led me through the old town with cobblestone streets and the old white houses of lava rock, built by Incas. Due to the mostly white buildings, the city was called Ciudad Blanca. We went to look at the Cathedral de Arequipa with all its ornaments and riches, past the Mirador de Yanaguara and Claustros de la Compañía, and the Monasterio de Santa Catalina. It was a strange, nice ambient, crossed by the Italian and Spanish influences. We visited the museum, passed through a beautiful park with exotic plants and flowers, and finally landed at the Plaza de Armas. There we finished this impressive day in a cozy bar. I argued with Caesar about it not to go on a bus again. Caesar relented, and so we set the next day in a small plane to Cusco. The sight over the snow-covered Andes from above was simply overwhelming, but when the pilot was positioning for the landing, I felt completely different. Far and wide, no runway in sight, only the high Rocky Mountains came threatening closer. I anxiously grabbed the armrests of my seat until Caesar grabbed my hand. Suddenly opened up a crater in the middle of these Rocky Mountains. The pilot was practically sinking straight into death. I already had more than enough and waited with a coffee for Caesar, who was inquiring at the information for a favorable hotel in the city center. A trekking guide started to talk to me without limits, wanting to sell a trekking tour as if his life depended on it. Caesar came back, listened to everything, and booked for us. I didn't care anymore. Much worse, it could hardly come. So I thought. We took a taxi to the center of Cusco, but I realized I could hardly breathe. My bronchial tubes closed once again, and I could feel the sharp pain in my chest. The driver explained this was because of the extreme altitude of Cusco. Many tourists experienced the same as me. Cusco is 3,000 meters above sea level. The hotel was so very different than the ones I had seen so far, but very nice and cozy. We entered through a huge gate into a yard with tables and benches. From there we reached a cozy lobby with sofas and small tables in front of a huge open fireplace. The staff was extremely friendly and immediately noticed my problem of respiration. One of the receptionists advised Caesar to bring me immediately to my room. He would have a made tea prepared and sent to the room. The tea would help, and if I had reposed a bit, I would sure be better. Actually, this mate tea worked wonders. I felt a lot better after a cup of this delicious tea. I looked around a little in front of the door and noticed all hotel rooms were only to be accessed through the open gangways from the yard. Caesar's room was next to mine, but he was already out on the way to see the city. I had previously advised him not to wait for me. I went down into the yard, where only a single couple sat at the table. In one corner sat an old Indian, dressed in traditional Inca robe, with a poncho for protection against the cold, and a large pipe in his mouth. He offered his handcraft for sale. I ordered a café con leche, and actually got a reasonable one like in Arequipa, so I was reconciled with this country. Also, it were cold winter temperatures here. It was wonderful to sit in the bright sunshine. After the coffee, I had a look around the city, which was very light and bright with no dark alleys. How seemingly everywhere here the roads were covered with cobblestones. Old stone houses left the impression that one returned back to an old century. In many houses, the entrances were opened because they had small shops inside. In the city center, I came upon a large square with benches, park-like. All around were restaurants, bars, and even a discotheque. I looked at the shops, walked once around the center, and then made my way back to the hotel. The sun had disappeared, and it was very cold now. In the lobby, the open fire already burned, which provided a homely atmosphere. Caesar was waiting very anxiously for me. We decided to have dinner in the hotel restaurant, and this was no mistake, because the food in the cozy restaurant with the colorful windows was very good. The Peruvian cuisine, offering potatoes as a staple food, is very tasty. To round off the evening, we took a few drinks at the open fireplace. I felt in the company of Caesar, who was a wonderful interlocutor, as well as I hadn't in a long time. After a hearty breakfast in the morning, we set off to Machu Picchu. But when we reached our destination and I saw this huge mountain, I decided to go on to the valley and shoot photos from the bottom. I went to see Agua Calientes, while Caesar decided to climb the mountain. I had a walk through the little town on the Urubamba River, the natural spa of the river. I couldn't find, however, but there was an overwhelming sight of this raging river flowing through the middle of the Rocky Mountains. Many tourists practice rafting in this place. On the way back, we exchanged our experiences. Caesar told me of the fascinating mountain and the mystery why in this lonely height a city was built by the Incas and later was abandoned by them. It was virtually a ghost town, which was discovered much later by researchers. He conceded, however, such a tour would have been by no means anything for me, because he himself had problems with breathing, high up. Back in Cusco, we strolled through the center, where life was raging at the plaza. We stopped at a music bar, where the owner shot photos of us. Also, we knew each other only a few days, but between me and Caesar had been a familiarity, like friends known each other for years. The following day included a full program as we made the trip to the Valle Sagrado, the sacred valley of the Incas. But the bus ride alone was pure strain, as we were going like wild through the Andes, up and down. It didn't help much that Cesar put his arm protectively around me and the guide placed himself in front of the windshield. We were sitting on the very front seats of the bus, with the best view, and joked, "So now you see only me and not the mountains." On the other hand, it was fascinating to observe the changes of landscapes. It changed from rocky mountains to huge green mountain pastures where goats, llamas, alpacas, and chamois were grazing. Then again, we crossed the snow-covered mountains resembling the Austrian Alps. In this natural diversity grew firs, pines, and in dry areas enchanting cactus. It was breathtaking. We made our first stay at a big market where the Incas offered their handmade goods. Since markets are my absolute passion and had always been, I browsed through the stalls, admiring the hand-knotted carpets, hand-painted plates, saw beautiful children in their costumes, discovered funny warm bed shoes and homemade dolls made of wool, beautiful handmade jewelry, observed the colorful choice of vegetables and fruits, and finally bought a beautiful handmade leather hat I kept on immediately, and a warm jacket, alpaca ochre colored, with colored Inca typical patterns, colors with pictures of many small llamas woven into it. We continued our journey to a city. On the way we admired ornaments beaten into the rocks and beautiful cacti with colorful blooms. Passing by valleys with rivers including crystal clear water. In the village of Ollantaytambo, which retained its origin like the old bakery where we experimented bread baked by Inca recipes, and of course bought it. In the small center, one large marketplace, full of all kinds of sales stores, I tried desperately to find a toilet, and finally found one. In the ancient state, a pit drain and a shithole in the ground. Here I would have been affiliated neither the one nor the other, skillfully, and so I ran back to the bakery, walked around the horse, which stood in the yard, knocked on the door and asked if I might. They invited me in, and when I stepped through the kitchen, I was surprised up to shocked as geese and guinea pigs were running around free, and they explained to me this was the food of the family. When I was ready, our tour group came to meet me again for continuing our journey, which took us to a llama and alpaca farm. We could see a great variety of different animals, but for me the cute pups were interesting. I caressed and fondled while Cesar shot photos of me. I wouldn't miss, though, to feed the large animals. We walked uphill to the Inca women who sat in open straw huts processing the llama and alpaca wool. First, the shorn wool was combed, and then, at a water hole, the wool was dyed with natural colors. Here, in the peaceful place, the time actually had halted, and I realized the value of this hand art as I watched how the women, partly in the company of their children in pretty Inca robe, wove from the stained and dried wool the finished product. The bus took us a little further, where in an enchanting open-air restaurant expected us a lunch buffet arranged in a ring. Potatoes, the sacred fruit of the Incas, in all different variations: baked, boiled, fried, in salads, of course, with meat dishes, vegetables, salads, and delicious desserts at the end, like mousse and delicious cakes. We sat together with other younger trip participants and became a very fun group. After lunch, the journey continued to another city. Pisac was at the foot of a mountain in where a giant stone pyramid in form of giant steps was built, a true miracle of the Incas. The sight of people from a distance climbing these meter-high levels appeared from afar like an ant colony, kept me from joining them further. I preferred to wait in the city for Caesar and the rest of the group, especially as I was suffering again from respiratory ailment. It was not boring to me, because I photographed this building from below, strolled through the streets, looked at the shops, and had actually to laugh to find in this ancient region an internet cafe, which absolutely didn't fit here. There I took advantage of the opportunity to call Chris. "Where on earth are you, Rita? I try constantly to call you. I'm pretty high up in the mountains. Here it is quite difficult with the telephone net." Thrilled, I reported about my experiences to repeat everything for Michael. "I've quite a lot of photos I will show you when I return, okay?" After the phone calls, I let myself down in a street cafe, enjoying the glorious sun, having an Inca cola, and watched the doings of people. In a conversation with a woman from Switzerland who lived here to provide development aid, the time passed by quickly until the group descended again. We passed a small town, but didn't stop. I read a sign here was held every Saturday, a street party with music and dance. "This would be something nice," I commented, but Caesar had become from his climbing so broken he didn't necessarily want to know about dance music or anything. The next stop was a little unprepared and involuntarily a flat tire. We found ourselves in a poor village where people lived in primitive log cabins. For 2 hours we all hung around quite stupid, until the driver could get a spare tire in a neighboring town and conducted with the help of a mechanic to change tires. When we finally reached in the dark our ultimate score, a mission church from the 18th century, I was so tired I stayed on the bus. It was enough for me. The last day for me, Caesar would stay on. We spent in the huge market hall of Cusco, where I found a cute hand-carved jewelry box, and for Michael I bought a warm sweater handmade of alpaca wool. A woman sat in front of her goods with her baby on her back and a little boy next to her. I was immediately in love with the Inca baby. Smiling, the woman took the baby from the back and pressed it into my arm. Also, the Incas are not necessarily handsome people. The children, with their big black eyes and jet black hair, are cute. As Caesar photographed me with the children, I beamed at the camera. We sat in a newly opened street cafe. The operators, an Englishman, an Irishman, and a Russian from St. Petersburg. Amazingly, here we met people from all countries. We sat in front of our coffees, reflected over the last 4 days, laughing about funny things we had experienced. I spontaneously hugged Caesar. "You don't have the slightest idea what you have done for me to persuade me coming up on this trip." Caesar didn't quite understand what I meant, but I explained it to him, and for the first time I was able to talk about Colin's death without crying and what subsequently happened to me in Germany. "My goodness, I have indeed noticed. You were very sad when I saw you there in the restaurant, but I did not." I smiled and brought our conversation to another topic. "Where do you plan your next trip to?" "I don't know yet. Either to Europe, and I visit you when you go back to Spain, or to Brazil." "I was already there, in Santa Catarina. It is beautiful there." Next time I'll be checking up the north. I heard Fortaleza is very nice. Don't you want to accompany me? I thought, of course I would like to, but at the moment it is absolutely unthinkable. First, I must get my life back under control and make a decision where I will live, in Germany or Spain. We stay in touch any case. I like you very much, as a friend, and funny to accompany. When I fly, I will let you know. Then you can think about it, okay? Caesar brought me to the airport, and I thanked him again for the wonderful time before we said goodbye. I initially flew from Cusco to Lima, and from there, to my surprise, to Lanzarote. When I called Bless to point out Mario's error, Bless confirmed this was correct. He would expect me there. The arrival in Lanzarote was a bit chaotic. Blessed waited for me at the port, just didn't inform me which one. So I initially made a round trip by taxi until we finally found us. Together we took the bus across the island to reach the ferry terminal to Gran Canaria. I was too tired and exhausted to ask any questions. I simply looked at the rocky landscape. Lanzarote, a holiday island. The bus overtook some donkeys which were used here as public transport. At times it was a very nice landscape, but it was very dusty everywhere. Finally we changed from bus to ferry, where I already felt much better. The sunshine and the wonderful sea breeze did me good. At Whiskey Cola I delivered a witty travel report, amusing Blessed with it. When we docked in Gran Canaria, I was already quite tipsy. We continued our journey, or odyssey, with a taxi until we stopped at the interior of the island, in a village in front of a nice house. Blessed explained to me this was his house. But then why do you live in this primitive dwelling in El Palo if you have a cute house? I blurted out. It is only temporarily, and cheaper than a hotel. I live partly here, partly in Tenerife, and sometimes I stay in El Palo. In the house we were received by Blessed's brother, who quickly served me a cup of coffee. But I was sitting around there rather stupid, because I understood not a word of what Blessed talked to his brother. Blessed briefly left to get something to eat for me, because he knew from Chris I wasn't exactly a big fan of African food. With a bocadillo, he came back and apologized for not finding anything else. Tomorrow in Tenerife you will get something sensible, he promised me. I watched TV a little while, but I would have rather seen the sea. Bless steeled his already muscular body with weights. He later showed me the guest room, a bright wood-paneled room. After showering, I went to bed, tired and satisfied. For me, it could have continued like this at the moment, from one place to another, an outlaw, far away from all the pain and sorrow. With the thought of all the places I had seen within shortest time, I fell asleep. In the morning, after taking a shower, I crept quietly out of the house, walked through the village, and soon found a cafe with a sun terrace. Sat down there and ordered a breakfast. Toast, fried eggs, bacon, freshly squeezed orange juice, coffee, of course, what a treat. Ole España, I was back. Although the Canary Islands belong geographically to Africa. I almost forgot the time and was shocked when I looked at my watch. I quickly went back to the house, where I was received by Blessed's brother, with the words, "Where are you coming from now? Blessed is looking for you already. In half an hour is your ferry going." I felt guilty, but soon Blessed returned and was relieved when he saw me. "Hurry, we must go." I quickly gathered my things. Blessed's brother ordered a taxi, and soon I was sitting on the next ferry to Tenerife. However, asked me what was this round trip for. At the ferry terminal, we were greeted by a cousin of Blessed with a brand new chic Honda. Like naturally, Blessed sat behind the wheel and laughed when I looked at him inquiringly. Yes, this is my car. We stayed initially in the big house of his cousin when Blessed explained to me, when Chris arrives, I will book for you a hotel room. Until then, you can stay here with us. Chris will be here tomorrow or after tomorrow. Bless took me for a drive in the Honda, showed me a little of Tenerife. I noticed the island was quite hilly. I saw not the side where the beautiful beaches are, and most tourists stay. We were exactly on the other side, at the northern end of the island. Blessed was here a lot extroverted than in El Palo. He even turned out to be quite funny and interesting. With coffee and cake, we let the sun shine on our heads at the port when Blessed asked me, what will you do now? Will you return to Germany? I will have to. Indeed, I have a son there, I answered, almost in resignation. You know what I mean. Will you stay there or are you coming back to Spain? If so, you could work for me more often. What do you think? For this trip, I'll pay you 5,000 euro, he said and looked away into the distance, and I almost dropped my cup. 5,000 euro? Blessed! I'm not stupid. Tell me what I brought from there. The clothes are not worth the money. Not yet, Rita, but they will be multiplied, and then they are worth more than that. I believed Blessed not a word, but I didn't want to think about it, not in this moment. I had plenty of problems to solve, and okay, if he wanted to pay me this money, it could help me. In the evening, we visited together with his cousin and friends a Chinese restaurant. Blessed was very well humored, and created one joke after another. The next day I walked alone to the port, which, however, turned out to be quite a forced march down the steep hill. I rather not thought about the way back. Instead, I strolled through the city center, sat down in an ice cream parlor to begrudge me with a sundae. It was actually very nice here, but I missed the beach and the sea. Unfortunately, I only saw the sea at the port. The beach didn't exist on this rocky side. Towards evening, I allowed myself a taxi back as Blessed announced we would go to an African restaurant. I turned up my nose, but Blessed laughingly assured me I would like the food there, and in fact, it was so. With a big appetite, I ate boiled meat with vegetables, seasoned potatoes and rice, very hot spiced, and drank malt beer, one of my favorite drinks, which I couldn't really find anywhere in Spain. The DJ put on black music. I played billiards after dinner with some guests. However, soon set me back next to Blessed, because the stupid harassment of the Africans rather got on my nerves. Blessed was very quiet. I asked him what was going on. He only shook his head, then leaned over to me and whispered in my ear, I am listening to these idiots talking. They are talking shit about their own women. Without another word, he stood up and went outside. Of course, I couldn't understand a word of what the men talked, but shouted at those Africans sitting at the bar, you machos, you don't have respect, eh? I'm also a woman, and in my presence, you're not talking about women like this. Several pairs of eyes, an open mouth, stared at me. No one said anything. I tried hard to stay serious. Through the window, I watched Blessed holding his belly laughing. He had heard everything from outside. One of the Africans asked me pretty stupid, do you understand our language? Yes, of course, I replied, still remaining serious. One of these macho men, however, seemed to be a little smarter and pointed to Blessed, who came back in through the door. Nothing she understands. He translated what we said. Blessed and I broke out in laughter and clapping our hands together like brothers. The next day, Chris arrived with Ben. Blessed had set off early to pick up both from the airport while I was still asleep. I was having my coffee when I heard them entering the apartment. Then Chris stood before me, dressed elegantly with expensive jeans, t-shirt, and a wide, light summer blazer. His shoulder-length hair tied back in a ponytail. To greet me, he hugged me and gave me a kiss on the cheek. "You look a lot better than the day you arrived in Malaga, but after such a holiday." First of all, we sat together. I told them about my experiences. Blessed reported about our shared experiences here. Then the men continued speaking in their language. I withdrew myself to go for a walk. Alone, I wanted it that way. All these weeks I thought about Collins. He would never return, but I lived, and I wanted to love and be loved. In Germany, I would be lonely in any case, so why shouldn't I make use of the time I still had left? Chris was a damn attractive man, and all he wanted was me coming back to him. He seemed to have changed much, and wasn't any more this macho, inaccessible, like earlier. Shouldn't I give him another chance? "Collins, you have abandoned me, but you will remain forever in my heart, until perhaps we meet sometime and somewhere again. In this life it wasn't meant to be." I spoke softly, and could feel my tears. I wiped them away and went slowly on my way back. "Did you cry? What's wrong?" Chris asked. I shook my head and forced a smile. "Nothing. Everything is okay." Once again we ate in the Chinese restaurant, and Blessed made his jokes. Everyone was cheerful, and the food tasted excellent. After dinner, Blessed handed me an envelope. "Your money. Count it." "No, I trust you like this." Chris and I picked our luggage as Blessed reserved a hotel room for us. The room was furnished with a bunk bed. When Chris saw this, he laughed out loud. "Then I shall sleep on top and you take the down one, no?" Side by side we sat on the lower bunk bed when Chris pulled me gently close and kissed me. It was a very affectionate kiss, like I previously never knew of Chris. Astonished, I looked at him. I was such an idiot. "Will you give me one more chance?" Without answering him, I kissed him, threw my arms around his neck, as Blessed, unsuspecting, crashed into the room. When he saw us, he was embarrassed, and immediately turned around with the remark, "Oh, I'll do that again," walked out, closed the door behind him to knock in the next moment, and then again opened the door. As if nothing had happened, he said, "The room is paid for 2 days. If you stay longer, it is your affair." Suddenly we all broke out in silly laughter about this funny scene. Then Chris said, "No, we will leave then. I have some things to do in Fuengirola, and also I'm moving." Blessed offered to book a flight for us. We accepted gratefully. Once again alone, Chris kissed me again, pushed me gently on the bed, and lay down on me. We just laid there and kissed. "Why were you crying?" "Forget it. It's over." He understood what I meant. "Will you sleep with me?" he asked quietly. I nodded. When it was over, Chris lay exhausted next to me and said in astonishment, "Baby, I never knew you were a little wild cat." Satisfied, I sank back into the pillow. So many things you don't know about me, because you wasn't interested. Soon after we fell asleep. Except on the first night. I never had sex more than once with Chris, and I didn't desire it either. Chris was not Collins. I would never be. At breakfast, Chris asked again, "Will you return to Spain?" Chris, what should I do when I come back? If I go to work, I earn too small for me and Michael, assuming I find something. It's not too late. You could open the bar again. Also, I am around, you know. I waved him off. The chapter with the bar is finished. And if I search a house for us, don't you have no right for unemployment benefit? You've always worked before. You could live off this. If you don't want to make yourself dependent on me, and you can then find a good job without rushing. But believe me, I want to provide for you and Michael. Leave everything as it is. I have to try to get a foothold in Germany again. If I find once again a good job, I could then come more often to Spain. This is currently the best for everyone. We spent 2 wonderful days in Tenerife, with walks along the pier, hand in hand, went for a stroll in the city, spotted a very good restaurant at the port, where we had excellent pepper steak with fries and salad. Chris showed me his romantic, tender and funny sides. Then Blessed came with a bad message. There is no more flight from here to Malaga. It's all booked out. So I've booked you for Sevilla. Sevilla? What should we do there? I asked in alarm. I had by now enough of round trips. From there, buses are going to Malaga. Don't worry, Chris reassured me. Shortly after 10 o'clock in the night, we sat in the plane direction Sevilla, where it was freezing cold. Before the morning, there was no bus going, we learned when we reached the bus station. All around was nothing. Only the station restaurant was opened. With my light summer clothing, I froze terribly. Chris took off his jacket and laid it carringly over my shoulders. So we were sitting now dead tired and freezing in the lonely station hall, in company of the bum society. There ain't nothing more romantic than a night with you in the station hall of Seville, I joked, as Chris held me in his arms to warm me. Let's go to the restaurant, he suggested. And then? I'm not hungry. Shall we sit there 3 hours in front of a coffee? Even Chris wasn't hungry. We had a good meal on the plane, so we sat down in the restaurant to escape the cold. For Seville is pretty high up, and in the inland of Spain, where it becomes warm very late, but if it gets warm, then properly. Listless, we poked around in the food and changed initially to coffee and then to wine and Chris to whiskey cola. The time was simply not running, and I didn't really want to get drunk because I was planning to rent a car after arrival. So I switched from wine to coffee again. After we couldn't think of nothing else anymore, we sat back in the cold hall. This night didn't seem to end, but at some point it happened, and the bus came up for Malaga. There I rented a car, and we drove directly to Fuengirola. I was tired, exhausted, and served of traveling once and for all. Where are we staying, Chris? First in my house. With this ass, Prince! You're not seriously believing this will function. Just leave it up to me. But as I knew, the stress already started when I wasn't even completely in the door. What does she want here? I told you I don't want to see that one here. Next I watched Chris, as angry and roaring loud as I never saw him before. This is my woman, and she stays, whether you like it or not. You seem to forget the apartment still belongs to her. But I advise you, anyway, to go and look for something else, because I am moving, and I doubt Rita will extend the lease for you. Chris signaled me to sit down. The CD player was playing music, which seemed suspiciously familiar to me. I got up and looked at the CDs in front of this player. Sure, they were mine. Now I was angry with Chris and Prince. Chris, I have trusted you with my CDs to keep them for me and not for this asshole scratching and spoiling them. Look at how they like now. Threatening, Prince came up to me, but he couldn't intimidate me. What do you want? Beat me? It would be my purest pleasure to have you removed from the place by the police. I gathered up my CDs and brought them into the bedroom. From there I could still hear the loud argument between Chris and Prince. I understood not all of it, but heard repeatedly the sentence, "She is my woman and she stays. If you don't like, you're free to leave." Then I heard the loud bang of the front door. I carefully looked around the corner. Chris was sitting on the sofa, far away in his thoughts, gazing out the window. When he noticed me, he stood up, pulled me into his arms, and suggested to cook something for us. "Do you want to go somewhere afterwards?" I shook my head. This day I didn't want to do nothing, just felt like relaxing. "Okay, then we can watch a movie on DVD after eating. What do you think?" The proposal was acceptable. Cuddled up together comfortably, we watched the movie, which was very nice and interesting. Before it finished, however, the front door opened, and Prince was back. Ignoring me, he spoke to Chris as if nothing had happened, took the remote, and switched on to the television program without being asked to, sat down opposite of us, and stared stubbornly into the TV. "You're not normal, are you?" I asked, angry. Chris waved off. "Leave him. It doesn't make sense." "Nothing I leave. I've had enough. Either he goes at once or I will," I shouted, applied. Provocative, Prince stared at me. "You are not going to chuck me out of here. Not you." "This we will see yet. Tomorrow I will talk to Carmen." Angry, I left the living room, changed myself in the bedroom, put on the CD player in there, and angrily turned the music on full volume. Let the neighbors go and complain about it. I didn't care. After some time, Chris came to the door. "Baby, turn the music down, please." "Why?" "You're moving out. I no longer live here. Let the neighbors send the police on the neck of that stupid ass," I hissed. "Baby, please. I am also coming to bed soon. But leave this ass outside and don't bring him with you." Chris turned to me confused and made such a stupid face, I had to laugh again. In the living room, I still could hear those two arguing. Then it became quiet, and Chris came back into the bedroom. Still mad, I repeated, "I'm serious. Tomorrow I will talk to Carmen and solve the lease too, prematurely. She doesn't have a choice. If I tell her I am returning to Germany, she knows she won't see money, no matter who is paying now." "Yes, it's okay. Do it then, but calm down now." "You're not a wildcat, you are a lioness." And how I was. When we made love, I screamed loudly for the purpose to provoke this ass, who had no woman and probably would never have one. Chris begged me again and again, "Baby, not so loud." He closed my mouth with kisses and finally held his hand on my mouth. I thought it quite funny, opposed to Chris, who growled, "You did this on purpose." We talked about how we could solve this annoying problem, and came to the conclusion it was best if we first pack up the things of Chris and move together to the Belle Mar. "With the two of you here, I can't stand it. You're scratching your eyes out of each other." Chris lamented playful. "Is this my fault?" I hissed. "No, no," he soothed, grabbed me hurriedly to kiss me passionately. In the morning, I clung myself purposely on Chris' neck when Prince appeared and earned very evil looks. Prince was truly jealous, like a cheated wife, and he behaved so when Chris began to pack his things. "Chris, you can't be serious. You can't do that. You cannot simply leave me alone." With hateful eyes, he looked at me. "Now you finally got what you wanted, you bitch." Thus Chris now roared back at Prince. "Be careful, Prince. You're not insulting my woman. She has nothing to do with it. It's my decision. For a moment it seemed as if Prince was going to attack Chris. However, thought twice about it. He wouldn't have had a chance anyway, this little poison dwarf. When at last all our belongings were stowed in the car and we drove towards Verlamar, I was relieved. Chris, what is this with you and Prince? But he's jealous of me. We are like brothers, grew up in the same village. He can't get along by himself here and has no official papers. I, Robert and Jerry have official documents. The others don't and depend on our help. I couldn't rid myself of the feeling there was more behind the story. In the Verramar, I was happily welcomed as always. We got a room without difficulty. We booked for 5 days. Chris made sure those days were very beautiful. We walked along the beach promenade, enjoying the first warm sun of Malaga. Every day Chris invited me to dinner. As earlier, we sat with the staff of the Verramar on the terrace. We made love and shared affection. It was a completely different Chris I was experiencing. On one of those days, we went to Malaga to see his friends. It was a very nice meeting because I liked Kevin and Shinadu. A day before my departure, Chris directed me in Malaga to a different address. There, he explained to me he would now live until I had made my decision. The apartment was big, and Chris would share it with a couple. Him African, the wife Spanish, and Mike, whom I liked right away by his very funny way. Mike also spoke German. He helped to bring Chris things into the apartment, showed me the room they would divide, and joked, "From now on there will be party here with all the girls we are going to tow here," but quickly soothed as he saw my look. All 3 of us had photos taken as memory. Me, the small person between those 2 huge, almost 2-meter men, appeared on the photos like a little girl with a batik shirt and jeans I bought in Curaçao, and with my brown shoulder-length hair. The farewell from Chris, Mike, and Spain was very hard for me. This here was my home and not Germany. Both men tried to convince me to come back soon with Michael, and I was so sure Chris' feelings for me were true. The landing in Hamburg was like before, this feeling of suffocation, the dark curtain closing above me. It was raining cats and dogs, and this time nobody picked me up. It didn't matter. Proud with my fancy Peruvian leather hat with a white brim, which suited very well with a denim jacket I also brought as sample from Peru, I marched off towards the taxi rank. Should the people stare at me, I was unlike these people here, and now wanted to demonstrate this open. Half an hour later I was back in front of Kathy's door. The greeting was very subdued. Michael was happy, hugged me as greeting, but was very quiet, striking quiet. The only 2 who almost overturned themselves with joy were Marcus and Max. My confidence was pretty much restored. My health also, and the most important, I possessed money. From now on, I would let no one push me into the role of the weak homeless who had to be grateful she was taken in by her daughter. It was Cassie who didn't send Michael back to Spain. Now she had me and Max in addition, and it simply passed my ass that the atmosphere was getting more and more irritated. If I had to do things, I borrowed the BMW from Mark instead of taking the bus. Chris called me every other day to let me know he loved me and how much he missed me. Slowly, I was ready to see my old friends again. Visited Ahmed and Kadriye, then Ushi and Sabine. Sure, I had to face all the same questions. Why did you give up so quickly? What will you do now? Will you stay in Germany? The questions I had been afraid of at first, but now I was ready to answer them openly. Only about my love for Collins and his death I spoke to no one. This was solely my business. Even Rosie set herself spontaneously in the train and visited me for a day we spent mostly in Altona. Initially, I was quite uncomfortable to invite her into Kathy's apartment, preferred to take her to a restaurant. Then we moved our location into a cafe. Since it was still very cold in Germany, I finally took her with me, after I called Kathy and previously forewarned her. Within 20 minutes, Kathy actually managed her chaos, at least superficially, to be removed. Nevertheless, it was obvious this ghetto community gave not necessarily the best impression to Rosie. With Marcus, Rosie joined immediately friendship, and Kathy showed herself from her best side, served coffee and cake. But when I brought her to the station, she said, "This, here, is no life for you and Michael. How long will you be able to stand this? This is not you, Rita. This is not your life here." I shrugged my shoulders. Right now, I know nothing at all. Here in Germany, nowhere is my life. But what can I do if Michael refuses to return to Spain with me? Michael's resistance, however, seemed to crumble, alone by the fact that Chris was trying to influence him with every call. In addition, Michael's illusion was vanishing about the oh-so-nice life here. During Michael's time in Spain, his old friends had also found replacement for him, and he was here now somehow an outsider who didn't really belong to them anymore. The lack of space in Kathy's place was getting now well on his nerves, as it did on mine. For him, there was only one corner on the bunk bed where he could retire, or he played video games with Marcus. I slipped away from there and spent my time looking for work, or stopped in the new Argentinian cafe in Ottensen, where I could at least speak Spanish, and thus was nursing a bit of my homesickness. Meanwhile, I also had been to the employment service, the only score with a positive result. My 3-month banning period for giving notice myself had long since passed, and I received not only unemployment benefit, but also a great additional payment for the month I already should have gotten it. Kathy and Mark were becoming every day more intolerable. Mark finally made it quite clear he wanted us there no more, and began to renovate the apartment. But no, not just in one room. He began simultaneously in all rooms. We were now not only falling over mugs, dirty laundry, or toy cars lying around everywhere, and if we didn't watch out, we found ourselves involuntarily on one of these mini skateboards. We also not only had to jump over my boxes I had brought along with me, additionally were paint buckets, ladders, and tools everywhere in the way. Whenever I wanted to lie down to sleep, it wasn't possible, because Mark labored exactly that moment in some corner in the living room. Like this, it definitely couldn't go on. Sabina offered me to live with her for some time. I advised her in advance. It must be clear to her, once I moved in with Michael and Max, I would have to stay until I found an apartment for myself. That this could take a long time, I already knew by now, with experience. No, she assured me she didn't mind, because she and Tom were spending much time in their cottage in the Lüneburg Heath. Thus, Michael, Max, and I moved from one day to another to Sabine, where we had at least one room for ourselves. When Kathy came home from work, we were already gone, and she promptly stood crying at Sabine's door the same evening. "What do you want, Kathy? In your apartment is no place. We all just get on each other's nerves. Your husband has made more than clear he no longer wants us there, and here we have at least one room for us." Initially, it showed to be the best solution, because Michael and I finally came closer again. The problem, however, was Sabine's bitch, Tessie, that simply didn't like Max, what he truly not understood. But when Sabine, Tessie, and Tom were in their cottage, I had at least peace and quiet. For Michael, the way to school was shorter, so he was able to walk there. After the two returned home with their dog after a long weekend, it soon looked quite differently though. But first of all, it was peaceful, and I even bought with Tom's help and advice a 12-year-old Opel Corsa to be able to move around quicker. Tom reckoned the car okay, even though it looked rather shaken. But for me, the main thing was it functioned. For €800, I couldn't hardly expect more. A few days later, Tom was getting annoyed because all the doors had to remain constantly closed to avoid problems between the dogs. Sabina started to keep out of my way. When she came home from work, she immediately went to her bedroom, instead of chatting a bit over a coffee as before. I asked Tom what was wrong, but he just shrugged his shoulders. When I took Sabina to task myself, I was surprised to hear that we made up the agreement I would move out again after the long weekend. But now I had already been 2 weeks longer in her apartment. I reminded her of our conversation before I moved in, and also the fact that I warned her and had pointed out the difficulties to find an apartment. Also, we hadn't agreed on any time limit. But of all this, she didn't want to know anymore. It was obvious we were here also unwanted. Thus, I finally decided to go back to Spain. I found neither a job nor an apartment, and there was simply no place for us here. We were not wanted here. I shared my decision with Chris, and he was immediately ready to find accommodation for us. I also searched the internet. If I found something, I gave him the data, so he looked at the apartment, and if it was a suitable tenancy, to complete the agreement. What about Michael? How is he thinking about your decision? Chris asked. Just leave it up to me, I reassured him. First, Michael was still very skeptical, but in long conversations, I explained to Michael all the problems I had in this country, and that we were not welcome anywhere here. Michael's continued opposition crumbled. He began, however, to set conditions, as he knew exactly I would do almost anything to return back to Spain with him. Will you buy me a PlayStation too? Or will I get an electric scooter? Yes, yes, whatever you want. I also will send you initially to a language school, so you can learn Spanish properly before you go to a normal school, okay? This finally convinced him, and I had almost won, except for one small thing. I'll only come to Spain with you if you go with me one last time to the Hamburg Frühjahrsdom. He grinned, roguish. I pulled him into my arms. If it is no more, as if it was meant to be, I found on the internet an apartment in Rincón de la Victoria, directly at the beach. 3 rooms for €300, and instructed Chris to go and see this apartment, and if it was convenient, to make a contract on the spot. The place was neither too far from El Palo nor from Malaga. The rental fee a bargain. Happy and hopeful, Michael and I roamed the Frühjahrsdom, riding bumper cars. I invited him for dinner, let him go for many other rides, where I had to fit with my hate fear. On the way back, I asked Michael, how are we going to return to Spain, by plane or by car? Michael thought for a moment, then decided with a car. This I could only agree on, because all the boxes and cartons we had to take back again with us, and this way I was able wonderfully to transport them in the car and spare the freight costs. But I warned Michael, it will be a very long journey, Michael, and I pray our scrap car will survive this trip. From you, I don't want to hear, not even once, the question, are we nearly there? The journey is the destination, okay? Our decision was clear, and I told Sabine she would be rid of us before Easter. Why? Did you find an apartment? She asked in surprise. Yes, you can put it like that. In Spain. We are going back. This place here doesn't get me nowhere. To keep the risk as much low as possible, I went one day before our planned departure to the ADAC to have the car checked. When I asked the mechanic what he thought of the tires, he just laughed, asking me in return where I was planning to go with them. I wouldn't even dare to drive through Hamburg with these silks. However, when I told him I was going to Spain, his jaws dropped down. For God's sake, change the tires before you go. About the rest of the car, he didn't necessarily have a good opinion. The brakes are quite down, but the engine should make it if the car doesn't fall apart before. This man gave me so much courage. In the insurance office, I closed a policy which guaranteed us, in case of a breakdown or an accident, we would be transported home. Of course, I had an ulterior motive here. And where exactly would we be transported back in the event of a breakdown or an accident? Well, always home, of course, where your residence is, in this case Hamburg. The lady explained to me with a look as she valued me as a somewhat obtuse. I took my officially registered address of Mijas Costa from my pocket, placed it in front of the lady, and explained innocently, "But our official residence is this here, in Hamburg. We don't have one." Michael laughed and turned his head on the side. The woman was taken by surprise. Such a case she didn't seem to have had yet in her career. She was forced to talk to her boss. After 10 minutes, she returned to her seat, and after another 10 minutes, I held the insurance policy in hand, giving me a guarantee of repatriation to my residence in Spain in case the car wouldn't make it. On the way to Michael's school, I called Tom and asked him to help me change in the tires. If you can't even change tires by yourself, you shouldn't have a driver's license. Furious, I interrupted the call. Asshole, I thought to myself. Then it should just be these tires. I wouldn't be driving fast anyway. I could hardly wait to go, but to avoid all the Easter traffic and traffic slams, I stuck to my custom to go in the evening. We loaded up the car with my boxes, suitcases, etc. With the rear seat folded down, everything indeed fitted into it, but it somehow reminded me of our shopping at the metro. I had a cold and hot sensation when I remembered in the last moment all of my documents were still with Kathy. In a hurry, I called her on her cell phone. She was shocked to hear we were about to go back to Spain. Since she was on the way to a Keith Sweat show, she had no opportunity to say goodbye to us. Luckily, Mark was in the house, opening the door for me. Thus, the last box was also stored in the car. Then we started our great journey. Tom had previously drawn a map card I should stick with to prevent spending expensive toll fees. But in Germany, initially, I wouldn't need it.